Hello and welcome to the top custom Hearthstone cards of the week. First up is Electro's Discharge suit, 4 mana legendary shaman spell that reads, gain 5 armor, and whenever you overload this game, gain 3 armor. So after you've cast this spell, for the rest of the game, every time you play an overload card, you're going to gain 3 armor, which is pretty good additional value, and this armor should help an overload deck survive against aggro. Blizzard's gone in an interesting direction with Overload. Back in the Tunnel Trog days, Overload took advantage of powerful early game value on the board and Overload synergies. Their game plan was to get impressive stats out on the board early and pay the extra mana the following turn. But since those cards have rotated out, Blizzard's printed higher costing Overload cards, definitely geared more towards mid-range or control decks. The best boost to today's Overload deck would be to make all Overload cards better. Cards like Snow Fury Giant comboed with the Spellstone give some sort of goal to work towards when you're playing Overload cards. And I think this spell makes the entire process easier. Now, it's a little fuzzy of what would happen if you Electro Storm Surged and then played this spell. My guess would be that you'd gain 10 armor instead of just 5, but the Overload gain 3 armor effect wouldn't stack. That's my interpretation anyways. Regardless of how it works with Electro Storm Surge, the biggest issue with incorporating this to improve an Overload deck is consistency. You need to draw this early enough in the game so that most of your Overload cards give you extra value. It's a legendary spell, which means only 1 per deck, and with it costing 4, it means you can't draw it with Storm Chaser. So I think to buff this card, you actually need to raise it up to 5 mana in order to get more consistent draws. Bump the initial Battlecry armor up to 8, and then you can just make a deck with some Overload cards, throw in some decent early game anti-aggro cards, and you have a pretty good game plan. Survive and outvalue aggro, or try to quickly pressure mid-range and control. Overload Shaman wouldn't be the greatest deck in the world, but I think Electro Discharge suit is a cool Overload synergy, and it gives the deck a much better chance. Next up we have Overwhelming Force, 3 mana warlock spell that deals 12 damage to a minion and the rest to your hero. So your opponent plays a Deathwing and a Penguin on turn 10, as they usually do, and if you choose to use this spell on the Deathwing, it's simply 3 mana, deal 12 damage, and kill the minion. Pretty good. But if you use this on a minion with less than 12 health, like the little 1/1 penguin, then the 11 remaining damage goes to your own face. So it's a simple concept, but it makes for a really high risk, high reward card. Destroying a big minion for 3 mana is amazing, but even most big minions don't have 12 or more health, so most of the time you use this card, you're gonna take some damage. Using this to get rid of an 8/8 is still a decent deal, but what about when your opponent plays a lower health threat on the board? If Overwhelming Force is your only option, how much damage are you taking? Now, just a bit of time after this card was posted, another creator made a similar themed card, Back from the Brink. 4 mana warlock spell that deals 20 damage to your hero, with any excess healing your hero instead. So if you're at 5 health, this deals 5 damage and heals you for 15, leaving you at 15 health. Anytime you're above 10 health, you'll actually lose health with this card, and anytime you're below, you'll gain health. And if you're able to inch closer to death on your own turn with self-harming cards, you'll actually get more value and heal yourself for more with Back from the Brink. Both of these cards are simple, but great at balancing their value in destructive warlock ways. You can include Overwhelming Force in a control deck to tech against opponents' big minions, and Back from the Brink basically works in any deck. There are ways Warlock can take advantage of either card's self-inflicted damage, and both cards really make the user think about when to play these cards and how much risk it is to play one on a certain turn. Overwhelming Force and Back to the Brink both have great design and fit perfectly into Warlock. Up next is Pengstein the Historian, 7 mana 6/5 legendary neutral with the battle cry, discover a pack from any expansion and shuffle it into your deck. So it's kind of like a combination between Toki and Elise the Trailblazer. You play the card and you get to choose 1 out of 3 different packs, which are randomly chosen from all 9 expansions that have been released so far, regardless if they're in standard or rotated out into wild. The card doesn't specify, but I'm gonna assume that after you choose the pack you want, without showing you any cards, it shuffles that pack into your deck, and then just like Elise, you can draw the sealed pack and open it for 2 mana. I think we've seen from Toki that getting random wild cards in a standard game isn't meta breaking. The question is, would getting 5 cards from a specific expansion cause some trouble? Honestly, I don't think it would cause any more trouble than Elise the Trailblazer. Most cards from previous expansions aren't going to create crazy combos with the deck you happen to be playing. I think it's cool that based off of your knowledge of an expansion, you can choose the pack that's likely to get you a Death Rattle Activator or a mech. but you have to be lucky enough to get the perfect cards, and it's going to be rare that you're going to be able to get yourself a truly unfair advantage. The process to get the pack is slow like a lease, and for the most part, the cards aren't going to seamlessly fit into your deck. Some cards will just have decent stats and pretty much work in any deck. You may be able to synergize with 1 or 2 cards, and then there's also going to be those times where you might get cards that are just duds. The value Pingsteen gets you is going to be random, but for the most part, it's going to be of some use, and more importantly for the gameplay, it's going to add some interesting variety. Which is a nice way of saying it's RNG that, personally, I like. The only way I could see this in a competitive deck would be if there's a strong control meta and people are just scratching at ways to add additional value to their deck. In the current meta, I think this is mostly just a meme card, and if someone wants to invest a ton of time trying to get lucky, getting a specific expansion and specific card to get this crazy combo in Standard, then you know what, I think they deserve the win. I think Toki has showed us a little wild in Standard is fine, and I think a card like Pingsteen could be used in fun decks looking for some extra cards to spice up their game. Next up, we have Overcharged Conduit. 3 mana 4/7 with the battle cry, deal 4 damage to this minion. But this damage is also reduced by spell damage. So normally when you'd play this minion, the battle cry deals 4 damage, making this a 4/3. But let's say you have 1 spell damage. Instead, it only deals 3 damage, giving you a 3 mana 4/4. If you have 4 spell damage or more, it is a 3 mana 4/7. I hope that Blizzard's taken note on how people actually like the idea of cards that can be improved with spell damage. It's not that people don't like the gameplay of unexpected results, it's just that the card's value isn't really good enough. And so I like where Mage is going in terms of alternative ways to get value from spell damage, value other than just damage. But spell damage cards definitely need more support and synergies, which is where Overcharge Conduit could come into play. It's decent, if not a bit weak, for the meta Standard as just a 3 mana 4/3, but just how the card's stats are distributed, 4 attack being great for trades, makes any bit of spell damage to increase this minion's health a really solid play. Another issue with a card like Unexpected Results is if you happen to not have spell damage, which is pretty often, the card is a really bad play. Again, 3 mana 4/3 isn't amazing, but it's at least average to get you some value out on the board if you're in a tough situation. I think Blizzard should seriously pursue a tempo spell damage mage deck. They just need to figure out exactly how they want the cards and spell damage to synergize, and then print a bunch of cards to make the deck viable. I want to see a new spell damage mage, and I think Overcharge Conduit would be a solid choice to help fill the deck out. Next up is Triple Agent, 4 mana 2/2 rogue minion with the battle cry, destroy a minion, its owner draws 2 cards. You can use it on an enemy minion and it acts just like Naturalize, destroying that minion and your opponent draws 2 cards. But you can also use it on your own minions. Whether activating a Death Rattle or getting a 1/1 with Sonya, not only are there synergies with destroying a friendly minion, but you also get to draw 2 cards. The strength of this card is its flexibility. It's not as strong of a play against enemy minions as Naturalize, but if you're able to put this in a deck that can also benefit off of using this on one of your own minions, then the flexibility to use this in either situation makes the card pretty solid. Triple Agent synergizes well in Rogue, it has some cool combos, and I'm a fan of this card as an egg activator. It would be interesting to see if a Temper Rogue could use this and how much the card's flexibility would determine if it saw play. And last up we have Kronkle the Junksmith, 4 mana 5/3 legendary warrior pirate that reads, whenever a mech dies, equip a weapon with its attack and 1 durability. So let's say you play Kronkle out on the board and then rush a Steel Rager into an enemy minion. After the mech dies, you'll be given a 5/1 weapon. Also, the card doesn't specify that it needs to be your mech that dies, so if you just trade into an enemy mech, you can also get a weapon. If you're trading a mech into a mech, well, I don't know which of the 2 mechs would decide the attack of your weapon. There's a lot of things to consider when evaluating this card. The most value you're going to get from this card is on the turn you play it, because with only 3 health, Kronkle is probably not going to survive the next turn. So most likely, you're going to want to plan your turn out. One option is to go for a super high damage play. You can wait until you have a big mech ready to attack, maybe a couple of mechs magnetized together, and set up a good trade that allows you to get a high attack weapon. In most cases, going for a massive weapon isn't really viable because it's hard to get a high attack minion, it's tough to draw Kronkle, and the weapon just isn't worth purposely destroying a big, powerful, friendly minion. But Warrior also has weapon buffs, like a decent amount that could turn an 8/1 weapon into a 12/5 weapon, or maybe more realistically, a 10/3. Still, that's 30 damage. I don't think it would be the most competitive way to play Kronkle, but some sort of combo to get a massive weapon could actually work to win games. That is, unless your opponent has weapon removal, or if a mech on either side of the field dies with Kronkle out on the board, replacing your big weapon with a 1/1. So realistically, going for a game-ending weapon isn't competitive, but I think the card will act more like a tempo card. 4 mana 5/3 isn't amazing, but in the right situation, you can trade a 3-attack mech, swing 3 damage with your weapon, trade another mech in, and that 4 mana not only gets you the 5/3 stats, but also 2 weapon swings over 2 turns. If you set up your turn right, it can be amazing tempo. This is a solid addition to Warrior Mech, but it's not going to be enough to make the deck competitive. Blizzard mentioned that they're not planning to print a ton more mechs in the next expansion, so in order for Mech Warrior to ever be competitive, they need to print mech synergies that will make the current mechs better. Kronkle the Junksmith is a super unique way to give Warrior a powerful mech synergy, while also leaving room for some memes. That is all for this week's custom cards. Thank you to all of the card creators and for all of your card submissions. To find out how to make cards and where to post them, check out the description below. Liking and subscribing is always appreciated. Check out last week's episode, and until next time, ta-ta.